We're hitting this at exactly the time I predicted we hit it based on our pre-planning. Because
Yeah.
people, I mean, I'm gonna keep this in. I just want you to see,
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Vic and I pre-planned for 15 minutes before we hit record on this so that we can have some targets of our own and some milestones. And I want to tell you all, like, the more you invest in planning, the easier the work is to do. And in this case, our
Yeah.
work is sharing with you, like, better ways to do Last Planner.
Small amount of planning saves a whole lot of rework.
Welcome to the EBFC Show, the easier, better for construction podcast. I'm your host, Felipe Engineer-Manriquez. This show is all about the business of construction. Today's show is also sponsored by the Lean Construction Institute. LCI is working to lead the building industry in transforming its practices and culture. Its vision is to create a healthy and thriving industry that delivers outstanding project outcomes every time for everyone. Check the show notes for more information. Now, to the show.
Good viewers of the EBFC Show podcast, you're in for a treat as we continue our series on the Last Planner system of production controls with my good friend, one of my mentors in the industry, Mr. Victor Ortiz. Welcome back to the show, Vic Ortiz.
Hey, Felipe, glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. So people, if you're watching this series, you can watch it in order or you can jump around. It is meant to be taken in and grab you at exactly the right moment, just in time where you need the learning. So in the series, we've covered the history, some Last Planner basics, fundamentals. And today, Vic is taking me on a new, exciting journey into some gems and nuances of Last Planner. So without further ado, Vic, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Felipe. Well, as you said, we've talked about a bunch of things. We want to go a level deeper. And one of the things that stimulated, I think, both of our thinking about this particular session is that there's been discussion about what's real lean and what's fake lean. And a subset of that is what's real Last Planner and what's fake Last Planner. And I don't know that it's really fake. It's just what the question is, what does it mean to really do Last Planner, really do lean, really do Last Planner? I just want to call people's attention back to the standard LCI slide. And most people focus on the right side here, on the respect for people and optimizing the whole and so on. And all of that's good. But there's a couple of really key words here, and I've underlined them when we helped develop this slide, which is that lean is an operations strategy. If you studied PMI or project management and PMI has for years defined operations as what happens when the owner takes over the building or the plant or whatever we're giving them, and they operate it. So there's a blind spot when we're talking about the operations of defining, designing, engineering, procuring, assembling, and testing. Those are all operations too. They're business operations. And they are production operations because every one of those steps, coming up with a concept, we're producing a concept. Coming up with a design, we're producing a whole bunch of designs, actually. Procurement, we're producing all kinds of agreements and plans and specifications and delivery systems. And then, of course, in installation on the site, there are all kinds of operations that we're doing, from excavating to building to you name it. And project management doesn't really focus on operations management. So with lean, the key things for me are that we're talking about operations, and that's often off our radar screen. The term that we hear is that means and methods are the responsibility of the subcontractor, the specialty sub, and the trade. And in planning and project management, we leave that to them. And what that is a recipe for the chaos that we have and why we only have half of or like 80% of our projects going over budget and over schedule, because we're not focused on operations. So that's kind of our headline for today, is that if you're going to do Last Planner correctly, our focus should be on helping us understand the means and methods, the operations going on, no matter what phase of the project we're in, designing or engineering or constructing, and designing that in a way that allows the work to happen smoothly. It allows people to do what they want to do once, right, with good quality. Okay.
Yeah, and I'd say Vic, on social media, like there are some posts that we do when we're operating from the space, especially when we're talking about last planner system, LPS or pull planning. Some people just lazily say pull planning, and I don't know what they mean when they say pull planning unless they define it. I know what last planner system is, but I don't know what pull planning is unless the person defines it because it's one of those terms. But I would say that this is one of those trigger areas because you mentioned the fake last planner system,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of back and forth banter on posts. So if you're watching this and you want to get some good views on a social media post, talk about real last planner versus not, and you'll see people come out of the woodwork to fight you on these definitions and challenge from both sides, from the
Yeah.
PMI, PMBOK, Project Management Book of Knowledge side, where Vic is completely accurate. I'm a project management professional, PMP, trained and studied, and I can guarantee you that what Vic is saying is absolutely true. It's this other defined thing that they don't focus on. And if you look into the PMBOK, yes, there is language on scheduling, but when it comes to operations, they do treat that differently and is later, and that's never resonated with me. I would consider myself today, and in my own company, people tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm an operations person. It's like inside of our general contractor firm, you're either in operations or you're in support. Those are the only two things you can be in. And
Yeah.
I'm in operations. And so if with an operations mind, and people have even complained, support people, corporate people have complained. They're like, you're too operational. You're too focused on production. You're too focused on getting things done. You're too focused on accomplishing things. You're too focused on the business. These are all things I've been accused of being too focused on. So yes.
Yeah. You and I are both reading this new book by Todd Zabel called Built to Fail. And one of the brilliant things he talks about is how in the 50s and 60s, we went to this idea of professional management, that the salvation of manufacturing and of construction was going to be more and more professional management. And so we've loaded people up with schedulers and budget monitors and quality control people and so on who don't actually build anything. And those people are often paid more than the people who are actually building stuff and have that knowledge. And so we've created an overhead bureaucracy that is divorced from operations. And it's part of when we look at what adds value and what doesn't, often that doesn't add value at all. So one of the things that I often think is that we're going to talk about what it takes to get into the details of operations management in the construction site. What we ought to do is get rid of most of the schedulers and put them into helping us actually plan operations so that they get to understand operations, and so we've got somebody to jockey the computer systems and so on so that people doing the work can get on with the work, and the other folks can do something useful. So, okay, if that's not controversial enough, let's see what else we can come up
That's
with.
super controversial. So, my listeners, I know that I have a few project schedulers that still listen to the show. And what Vic is saying is that you'll have an opportunity to increase your skill set so you can deliver even more value and not limit yourself to just sitting behind a keyboard.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw up here on the screen a couple of models that are evolving, and this first one comes from LCI, generic planner flow, and also I think probably Ghaffari originally used this particular slide. And the thing we talked about in the past is that the whole last planner system started with Glenn and Greg looking at people trying to execute work and measuring how much of the work that they thought they could do they actually got done. And that was, still 52, 54% is pretty standard. And what we realized is that there was nothing shielding the people doing work from all this variation that happened upstream, which was incomplete information, materials not there, variations in staffing, and you name it. All these things got thrown, demands that had nothing to do with the work that was on the plan. You got to go do this. So the idea was to, do something to get work ready so that people who are doing the work in the field could actually do the work in the field and do the right work in the right time and so on. So we go back to if we're going to do better than 50% of what we committed, we have to do more look ahead planning, and we have to start identifying where variation is coming from. So when we do our commitment planning, we have to have a look ahead plan. And most people who start, can barely plan. We struggle to plan 1 week, and then we start adding 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and get up to maybe a 5 or 6 week look ahead plan. Well, what was all of that aiming at? That's the phase plan. And the phase plan is basically based on a master schedule. One of the things that we often don't see when people are putting Post-its on sliding Kanban boards or something like that is that they're not taking advantage of this concept of standard processes. And I remember really when they were doing a lot of look-ahead planning with Post-it notes on a big board, and we were then putting it into SBS Production Manager in the old days when I was working with them. We saw lots and lots of work that was repetitive. For instance, building a water softening plant out in the desert in an oil field, there were a whole lot of footings that had to be poured in order to have columns go up in order to create pipe racks and so on. And the process of creating a footing is a relatively simple standard process that you can begin to see. You've got to create the ground and level the ground, get it in the right position, and then you've got to create a frame, and you got to set and tie the rebar, and then you got to pour the concrete, and then you got to cure the concrete, and then you got to strike the frame, and so on. It happens over and over again. Should we be writing Post-its over and over and over again? Or can you recognize that there's a standard process which, depending on the size and location of the footing, might be a little longer, a little less, might use a little more or less concrete or a little more or less framing material, but often you can standardize those things. If people aren't using standard processes, that's one of the keys to knowing whether or not they're doing last planning or they're doing work, because they're probably getting really frustrated with having to write things over and over again. So you need to have a software to help you out with this, and the software has to be able to help you create a standard process library. So you've got 50 footings that you have to do. You don't have to do anything but plug in the standard process and tweak it a little bit for durations and see what that does to the work around it, and you're good to go. So this is another standard look of the master schedule, phase schedule, make ready planning, which is what we call look ahead, 4, 5, 6 weeks, weekly planning, and then doing the work. Well, from your experience, Felipe, how far into this system are people going when they call and ask for help with Last Planner?
Yeah, most of the time when people ask for help, what I find is they might have 2 or 3, sometimes 4. It's kind of funny how this slide is built, because they might only have 4 milestones in their entire schedule. And I'm like, well, no wonder you can't aim to where you're going. You lack a strategy. So I often help teams is like, we can identify that they're behind schedule. That's usually the call, is like, we're behind schedule. And I say, let me see your project schedule. And then I'll find that there are 4 or less milestones, which is usually a start mobilization milestone, a design completion milestone. So there's 2. Then there'll be a construction start and a construction finish, maybe like a substantial completion or a TCO occupancy type of milestone. So it's like 4. And then they say that's all we have. I was like, but your project schedule can have multiple work breakdown structures. We can group those by phase. I mean, there's things like, what phase are you in now? Sometimes they can't even answer that question. In that next example, you've got that phase. So, I mean, I've recently worked with a team, and the project architect was genius and declared a breakdown in the big room, which is exactly what you want. You actually want, so listen, people, you want to have a level of psychological safety where someone on the core team can raise their hand and say, I'm declaring a breakdown. We have a breakdown here. This schedule that you're asking us to do to hit these dates in our current, we'll call it weekly work plan, and to some extent a make ready planning. And they're using a sophisticated scheduling software. I don't want to name it just to protect the innocent and the guilty. They're using a sophisticated scheduling software for this type of solution. But what's lacking is an appropriate level of milestones and an appropriate designation of phases. They have swim lanes based on the authority having jurisdiction requirements, which is okay, but it's not sufficient for how the team actually puts things together. So I told the architect, I said, I'm here now. I'm going to work with the team. We're going to get all appropriate construction milestones into the schedule, and we're going to tie design to those milestones so that we can level the design out. There is no reason to make your team work hard right now, put in overtime to have what you suspect is going to happen, what's happened to you every day of your career, that you're going to work really hard and then it's going to wait and no one's going to use the product of what you work. And that's waste. And that is disrespect for people. But people on the team are like, but we got to hit this date. And I said, I was with you the day that you said, when you created the master schedule, and you said, we're just guessing dates now because we don't know. And I said, I'm going to remember that. And I remember who said it. And it was actually our superintendent. Now, he wasn't in this meeting where we had the breakdown, but I reminded everybody, I said, remember the day. It was a Wednesday. And we said together, we acknowledge that we're just guessing these dates now. They're guesses. And we're not going to get pregnant with these dates and think that we have to hit these and do extraordinary levels of work to get there. And then people were like, okay, well, we'll believe it. They said, we'll believe it when we see it. So I spent the good part of 10 minutes with one person on the team, and we put in 6 more milestones into the schedule that connect construction. And now I said, the person asked, like, should we just make these connections? And I said, no, we're collaborating. We're going to make these connections with the team in the big room so that everyone can get their head into alignment on what we're doing now, connecting to work in the future later.
So I think these two phases, the phase schedule and the master schedule, are really our production plans, probably is a better term than schedule.
Yeah, I would
But
agree.
what we're really doing, given what you're talking about, you got a designer saying, why am I working hard? Why are you asking me to have a complete design? What I need to know is, what do you need to know to get your work started?
Right.
And I will work backwards from that to say, what calculations, what kinds of things can we and should we create in order to release the beginning of work while other things are still in flux? That's the difference between push and pull, really, in this situation, is that we're doing work that is needed to release work that we've got to go. And the focus here is not on dates. It should not be on dates. It should be on what do we need to produce in what sequence. What a milestone is a chunk of work completed that completes a phase or completes part of a system, or depending on how you've broken down the work, that releases other work. So unless we have really stopped and talked about what is our execution strategy, what is the way we're going to build this thing, and therefore let that drive the design finalization and engineering so that it can support the work that's being done, then we're going to miss something. So most people kind of get this, but when we get into the nitty-gritty of what actually happens, let's look a little further in this. So there are various ways that people have looked at describing this. But again, we've got the daily work being executed based on production planning. And when the work doesn't get done, we are supposed to do continuous improvement. We look at commitment, reliability, reasons for non-completion, and root causes. So I don't know about you, it seems to me that one of the things that doesn't get done often in this, people didn't get a task done. And I see, and again, certain software systems don't require that we define dependencies or recognize consequences of missed work. So people just instead of doing continuous improvement, people just take that task and put it back on the production plan as if it wasn't having any consequence to our milestone.
Exactly. Now I got to chime in because this is one of those triggering areas. I think most software doesn't force you to, and even when it does, people, if they lack the process, and this is where you benefit from having someone like Vic on your team to explain to the team and bring them on board as to why you've got to do that. And you heard Vic say, he said it so effortlessly because it's so ingrained in him. Those activities cannot just go back into the production plan. They will have domino, second order, third order, fourth order consequences on the remaining work that's coming in the future. If you don't understand why that commitment couldn't be made, and when I say the you, I'm talking about the project you team, the universal you, the all of you, the us on this project. If we don't understand why one of our team members is not achieving something as committed, it is going to affect all of us because we're interconnected. You cannot just say, well, we're just going to replan that and just do that again. Try it again next week, or, oh, just take, more time. No, something has happened. We need to learn why you can't do it, because the you is also us. We are the you.
We hear all the time that building enclosure is the #1 problem in construction. And when the task of the building enclosure is presented with so much pressure, it's something most of us would want to avoid. Until now, there has never been a course to teach someone how to manage a building enclosure. Building enclosure is a problem for every company, and the solution is often to ask someone within to try to find training or provide training to their teams to avoid these issues. Field Verified's enclosure management course is the answer to that problem. We learned the hard way, we've learned through failure, we've learned from others. This course, our team, will help those people who are assigned to manage the building enclosure be successful the first time so that they're spared some of the suffering and hardships that all of us went through. There's so much opportunity for a high return on investment, not just when an individual attends and all of the skills that they'll achieve, but when a team participates together, they can raise their level of performance by knowing what each other can do, what to expect, and they can raise the level of performance of that company as their careers excel and the company elevates along with them. The training is built on the science of how people learn. We capture all of the components that are necessary to master a skill. There's a hands-on component to the training where we're building a masonry mock-up, a metal panel mock-up, we're doing EFIS, and even installing a window that later you get to test. The hands-on training gives us the opportunity to translate the lines on paper to actual construction in the field. We always laugh because after the training, people come up and say, this isn't just about building enclosure. There's a lot of leadership in here. There are a lot of people skills. That's because those skills are necessary to be successful in building enclosure and in construction. We'd love to see you get started right away. We have lots of options available. They can come to us in person at Field Verified in Phoenix, or we can bring the entire operation to your facility and train up to 25 people at a time. And we've created an online training that's available for people who might not be able to attend in person. Go to the website and contact us. We're going to start by understanding what problems you're currently experiencing and develop a specific program that's right for the needs of your company.
Exactly. So I think what we're saying is that when you check your PPC and work isn't getting done, that means that something didn't work in your production planning. And the feedback up to the larger execution level scheduling is look-ahead reliability. What in our look-ahead planning did we miss that meant that this work didn't get done? That shield that we're talking about didn't get put in place. And if we're using standard processes and work is still not getting done, is our standard process wrong? Or is it something else in the environment that's flummoxing our standard processes? So if we think, what's the feedback? What are we looking at to check if the production scheduling is good or not? Well, we look at schedule variance. How much did we move? But here are three things that people don't usually look at, which is cycle time. Is the reason that we're not executing the work because we put too much work into the plan because we don't really understand the amount of time or the amount of resources to get that done in time? Therefore, we think that we have a weekly throughput of so much work, but we don't. It's either too much or too little, and how many people are managing throughput, which is the amount of work we can get done in a certain amount of time, the amount of work that goes through a series of steps and is completed. And another thing to look at is, so how much stuff is sitting around, like you were saying, waiting for somebody to do something with it. So you've got work waiting for people or people waiting for work. So work in process is another thing that we try to get rid of. We want things to be done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not a big gap.
Yeah, and I got to say, before you change slides, on the root cause analysis, I think based on experience, I really don't see good root cause expertise in last planner facilitated happenings, meetings, either in the daily huddles, especially almost never in the daily huddles, or in the time where people create the production plans, or when they look back. I rarely see people, like you mentioned, PPC and variance, as if it's so widely done. It is the least, and I think it's one of the least things done. I think milestone planning and PPC and variance tracking are 2 parts of last planner system that people skip all the time.
Right.
And then there's some photocopy, bad ditto paper, the purple kind that you had in grade school, where it gets all over your fingers. And like there was like a whole steno pool for people doing that, like that level of quality of a copy. It's not even good. I'd rather have monks in a freaking temple scribing by hand than that type of copying that gets your hands all purple. So people, if you don't understand like how PPC and variance tracking complete the system and give your team the feedback so that you can monitor, are we at the right level? Like Vic was saying, when he went back all the way to schedule variance under production system status, you'll never know if your throughput's at the right level if you have no if you've cut the mechanism to give you the feedback. So PPC variance tracking are the mechanism to give you the feedback. The only other way to get it is to physically be standing every day on site and watching the work happen every single day. You'll get the context of what's happening. You'll have an intuition of the feedback, but you'll have no metric for it until you start taking all of that work and representing it in a number and in variance. And that number is the PPC. And I know that some of the software, and there's been this last planner system 2.0 where they've tried to create another level of KPIs, key performance indicators. But I got to tell everybody, like, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. PPC is still a good, even though it's a history looking indicator, you can still get trends. And if you just know a little bit about statistics, you can predict the future with PPC alone.
Well, and PPC, of course, can be gamed. That's another topic for us. But the idea is, what do you do with it when you're missing PPC? If you're not doing root causes. And I've learned over the years that when you're doing root cause analysis, you're kind of working backwards and saying, well, what didn't happen? Where did things break down? And you're kind of looking back into the past to see where things fell apart. Everything that gets done is done because somebody chooses to do it. And because each task, each step is made based on a choice, the choice is based on the underlying mental model that people have about work. So this is why we're spending this time talking about this, understanding the model of how this is supposed to work, because people end up screwing up because the underlying model they have doesn't work. Here's a quick example. Starting early on in the development of designs for a dormitory at a technical university that I was working on, and the group had signed the first IPD contract and committed to work together, but they didn't know what that actually meant. So the project manager for the constructor was trying to get into the the architect's office to sit in there as they were coming up with concepts, with layout concepts, and wanted to give advice about material choices and structural choices and what was going to be easier or harder to construct. And she had all the right ideas. But the architect's model was, we go to the construction person for costing, and it is our job to develop the design. And so we were doing a look-ahead plan, and the construction manager was saying, well, when can I get in and do this? Well, we're not ready yet. We haven't developed the design concept yet. We need to get it into drawings. We need to get it into maybe a model, a layout, before you can do that. We had a milestone for the completion of the layout, a decision about the layout about 4.5 weeks away. So the construction manager says to the architect, well, how long will it take you to get that to the point that you're willing to let me look at it? And she said, the architect said, 3 weeks. And then they said, well, and how long will it take you to cost it? Well, if you're going to go to that level of detail, I'm going to have to look at all of that. It's going to take me 3 weeks to cost it. So when they put that into the software, and this was good software that demanded that the durations and so on be added up and what the effect on the milestone would be shown, and they looked at their 3 weeks plus 3 weeks rather than doing things in increments and in smaller batches and talking about the implications as they designed. And of course, it pushed the milestone out a couple of weeks. And they said, this software sucks. This can't be right. And they threw out the software and went to an easier software that didn't demand that they show that. And of course, the software was doing exactly what it should have done. And the problem was their mindset. Well, okay, let's see where we can go with this. The point is that there's a lot more behind this. You know, you look at this model of the flow of activities, but what's going on in the analytics behind it is really important to understand.
But I think the funny thing is, like, even on this version you have here, this new model, if you're watching this podcast and you're seeing these models on these YouTube videos for the first time ever in your last planner experience, and no one's ever been able to draw this, then you might not have been doing last planner system. You might have been doing something else.
You've been doing collaborative scheduling, which is not production design and production management. That's an important distinction. This is from Strategic Project Solutions, Todd Zabel's company, an updated version of something we were showing earlier. And I know, Felipe, you've been giving presentations on what AI is going to do to the construction industry. And here, because these guys have been doing computer modeling for 20 years and working with Sci-Fi over at Stanford and so on. Here you have the same thing, milestone, production schedule, production plan, and executing the work. But over here, we talked about standard work library. Well, where do you get the standard work library, and how do you turn that into something that really has meat on the bones? And it's coming from building your project in the computer, whether that's BIM, 4D, 5D work. Todd would say if you can't build it in the computer, you probably can't build it effectively on site.
I would agree with that. If you can't, I'd even say it simply, if you can't draw it and talk about it and describe it in a way that people can have a shared understanding, then you're just making it up as you go.
Yeah. So the thing is that last planner is not going to be static, and we're really using it as a means of managing production. Where the industry has got to go and where it is going is more and more use of design. And if you don't have people who know how to construct things in creating this computer modeling in there early to troubleshoot, as the construction manager I was talking about earlier was trying to do in the design process, you're going to miss all kinds of things, and you're going to cause rework and bad decisions about materials and structural design and so on and so on, and you're going to create constructability problems. So this needs to be collaboratively done with a bunch of tools, and that's, in many cases, skills that have to be developed in our
And this is where Vic, on people that have a lot of TACT experience, TAKT, TACT planning experience, especially for interiors, the work sequences, if you're in, like, let's say you're building in a major city in the United States, because of building codes, it's almost the same exact sequence every time across the entire United States. And I've seen very similar things in Europe. There might be one or two nuanced change steps, but that standard work library can also come from industry standard practices. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And like Vic was talking about before we hit the record button, he said, you know, you could be burning people out with having to recreate these sequences over and over and over again, especially if you're on a big project with lots of people. At some point, people are going to, they're going to run out of Sharpie marker ink, and they're going to run out of Post-it notes, and they're going to say, can we just, do something easier? And I would say that is a great problem to have, where the team pulls. Like, you might not want to start your last planner system with some super fancy software. You might not want to start there, but at some point your team's going to mature and they're going to want to get some efficiencies, because copying and pasting is a technology we've had for a long time. Like, let's take advantage of it.
Yep, exactly. And it begs this larger question, the larger question of what does it take in order to know that a task is ready to be done? And if one of the things that we know is going to be in our production system, or going to be a requirement, is an inspection, is something, to prove that we have done things according to the regulations, as you're talking about. If you can build those things into a system, here's where we call it's not really artificial intelligence, it's just intelligence. If you can build that intelligence into your design system so that it flags when something is going to violate a design principle that you're building, you can have principle-based design that catches these things. And your inspectors, if they know and have input into this and know that you're using this system, can begin to have faith that we are designing the right stuff, rather than waiting until it's constructed and then coming and finding a fault and you have to tear stuff out. So this is powerful stuff.
And I want to tell you all, like, the more you invest in planning, the easier the work is to do. And in this case, our work is sharing with you, like, better ways to do last planner.
Small amount of planning saves a whole lot of rework, right?
Right.
So back when Glenn and Greg were coming up with this whole last planner system, and we're looking at the commitments that people made, and again, half the commitments were not getting done, they started analyzing, well, what should people have thought about before they made this commitment, before they said, yes, we can do that next week. And Greg came up with a simple 3 S's, which has nothing to do with the 5 S's about organizing your workplace. This is Greg Howell's 3 S's. And he said, a task, when it goes on the plan, we should check it for 3 main things. 1, is it the right amount of work for the time? What's the batch size of work? And I'm a strong advocate for if you're doing a weekly work plan, that needs to be in daily increments.
100% agree. I 100%, Vic, I 100% agree. So everybody listening, like, if you're going to work with me and Last Planner System, you'll know when the wheels and the machine is humming perfectly and we're in lockstep. When our weekly plan has tasks at the daily level breakdown.
Right.
I've been waiting, Vic, I've been waiting all month for somebody to say this, just so you know. You just made my day.
Good. And people go, oh, crap, what do we do with this? Well, your huddle, what are you doing in a huddle? What you're doing is doing the same thing you do in the weekly work plan on a micro level. You're saying, what did we get done today? If it didn't get done, why? Is there anything we can do this week to pull this work back on schedule? What adjustment? So you're actually redoing your weekly work plan every day as you go along. And that can be done in 10 or 15 minutes with a crew, but you got to be focused on the right things. What did we get done? If it didn't get done, why? What do we need to do about that? What's the effect? And if we can't get something done, we already know. We don't have to wait for the weekly meeting. We already know that we're pushing that milestone out. And we don't want to push the milestone out. We want to adjust. So we already are starting to put something on that next weekly look-ahead planning meeting schedule on that agenda to fix something that is broken and see if we can still maintain our milestone. Okay. So Greg's 3 S's were size, sequence, and soundness. So given the resources, the space, the people, everything that we have, is this the right amount of work each day to get us where we want to go by the end of the week? Are we doing it in the right sequence? Is somebody jumping ahead of where they should be? So we got to get everybody to agree that this is the way we want the work to flow. And then soundness is something most people don't think about. So let's talk about what soundness is. And this is kind of constraints analysis. So what Greg Glenn's did was they created a rule, several rules actually, and they said basically you cannot put something on the weekly schedule, on your commitment schedule or your daily schedule, if you don't know that the materials and equipment you need are available, if you can't say with absolute certainty that you got the right size crew ready and prepared to do the work, if you're missing information, design specifications, requirements, conditions of satisfaction, etc., if there are permissions or approvals that need to happen that haven't happened, if a predecessor task has not been completed with sufficient quality, so you're not going to have to undo something, and if the workspace isn't available. So we talk about you can't say yes if you can't say no. And by creating a rule here, what you do is you ensure that when somebody says, well, okay, I want to put that on the work plan, if you can't look at all these things and say, these are, check, 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 this is okay to go, then you shouldn't be able to put it on the work plan because you're setting yourself up for that 54% of production being completed. And when we talk about the predecessors being completed, if your last planner system doesn't clearly show what work needs to be completed before you can start this work, and there's no dependency between that, so somebody says, well, it's on the schedule, I better get started, but the predecessor work isn't done, then we're in big trouble. So we have to look at each of these tasks and understand it. Each task that we're putting on has predecessors, prerequisite work, information that's needed, materials that are needed, and so on. Each one, in order for us to commit to it, needs to have space capacity, sufficient time, and we have to understand what the conditions of satisfaction are, the controls, specification policies, any rules about installation before we can do this operation. This operation then creates an output which becomes the input for the next one. So we start having a flow that looks like this. We have an action that becomes the input to the next action, becomes the input to the next action. Now, what most people aren't used to seeing here is this idea of the queue in between, which means that when an action is done, how long does it sit there? If the action is deliver a bunch of pipe spools or a bunch of duct work or something, how long does it sit somewhere before the next action is of creating the hangers, and how long does that sit before the next action of installing this? We don't really understand the flow of work unless we understand this idea of queuing. And unless we can get the work at the right size, defined in a way that is sound, meaning that the person who's going to do this next action, when we declare that we're done with this one, this person will say, yeah, that's perfect. I'm able to go. So if we're not defining things in the way of soundness, this is going to break down. And if we're talking about the fact that we're behind schedule, like the jobs you were talking about, Felipe, what we'll find is that because work has not been done in the proper sequence and in the wrong batch sizes, what we're doing is we're creating gaps between the flow of work, and that is sucking up time, and that's sucking up money, and our throughput, which is the amount of time it takes to go all the way through this, our throughput is deteriorating.
Yeah, and some of the actions on the jobs I went to recently was talking to a friend in another part of the country, and he was saying, I still remember that time you came in and you helped us improve our schedule. We had what they thought was a permitting issue delay them 2 months, and you recovered our schedule for free. No extra cost, no extra expense, recovered a schedule, 100% for free, 60-day schedule improvement. He's like, how did you do it? I was like, I reduced your queues between activities. You have very large batch sizes. It's just the nature of how people put these plans together. They make these massive batches for quote unquote production type activities instead of right sizing things. And then what you have is like these big amount of times, and current waterfall schedules, critical path method schedules will not show you visually the queues. The queues are invisible. I've seen some people do some analysis on some very clever webinars, but I haven't seen it recently, so I can't draw it. But what Vic is showing here so imagine your work breakdown structure or your activities at the task level, the cues don't show up. And people always say like, well, the system can calculate critical path. Well, critical path shows no waiting time, but it's still inaccurate. It shows no float, and float is not the same as waiting and queue. Those are not the same concepts. They're close, but not the same. So if you right size your batches so that work gets used by the next person or team in place, you can squeeze those queue times down dramatically, and then you can make schedule time out of thin air for free.
Yeah. A nice way to tee up our next discussion, which might start with the difference between pull and push. And we use both in construction, incidentally. It's not all pull or all push, but if you don't understand what is what, which is pull and which is push, you don't know when to use which. But the key thing is moving backwards through all of this to understand dependencies and what needs to drive the system. Most people are just focused on the installation in the work site or the creation of design documents. And there's all the systems that feed and enable the work at the work system to happen that are not in any control at all. They're not on the schedule. There's nothing in our last planner system that's controlling like the delivery of materials. And all of these same principles about batch time and queuing and so on are being decided by people who are in our fab shops or our procurement, or figuring out how much can fit on a flatbed truck because they're tasked with reducing the transportation cost with no understanding of what they're doing to the cost on site by delivering more materials or in the wrong sequence than we need. And so what they think they're saving is actually probably costing much more by, again, the underlying mental model about what their job is and the choices that they're making.
Yeah. And people, while you're watching the show and if you're thinking about something, if something is striking you like disagreement, that's a perfect time for you to drop a comment and ask a question or get some clarification. I will be monitoring all of the comments and I'll pull Vic in to get some answers too. And we'll also answer these questions on LinkedIn and create posts. Because if you're having that question or you're getting this rub, if you're feeling like, man, this is just not sitting well with me, you're probably not the only one. And I will tell you, based on what Vic shared at the beginning of this episode, 80% of schedules are failing to deliver on time. 80% of plans that people are creating are burning people out. They're not finishing on time. You're wasting resources. You're not making money. You're not keeping the lights on. You're burning people out. You're causing frustration and stress that's unnecessary suffering. There is a way to do it differently. And I challenge anybody listening to this show, if you want to talk about this, Vic's phone number and email are on his profile. My phone number and email are on my profile. I've had multiple hour conversations to talk about this, and you better be ready because I'm coming with my portfolio. So if you're going to try to tell me that your method is better or you do it a different way, I'm going to ask for you to share your results. Now, it's okay to say, I don't know. And when I started, I didn't know. I had to learn this system, and it took me probably 5-ish years before I became proficient. And so I would say, like, the concepts that we're sharing, you can take those back to your projects now and start to do some little experiments with little pieces of your work so you could get your hands dirty with the last planner system. And then you can go more, scale it up as it makes sense, or you can hire somebody like a Vic. Vic is amazing. Definitely hire a Vic or a Vic equivalent, and then that you can get some coaching to accelerate your practice. But it's a practice. You've got to practice. Greg and Glenn didn't just descend from the mountain and come with like the 10 tablets of the last planner system, right, Vic? They iterated on it with experimentation and practice, and other people have contributed since then, like Todd and some of the work that SPS has done, and Ghaffari's contributed quite a bit of knowledge to this, and then other practitioners. So this is a living, breathing system that's for people. This is a for people system.
Well said.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. The next time we come back, we're going to focus on push and pull.
Yep. And on constraint removal by managing a larger system, getting your operations in control.
Thank you, Vic. Always a pleasure spending time with you and getting into how your brain works.
Good luck with that. I'm still figuring that one out. All righty. Well, best to everybody. I hope that everything we're talking about will help you get more work done, have more fun doing it, and make more money.
Very special thanks to my guest. I'm Felipe Engineer-Manriquez. The EBFC show is created by Felipe and produced by a passion to build easier and better. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, everybody. Let's go build.